This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 19. Today we have Trent Russell with us. Trent is the founder of Greenskies Analytics, where he helps internal audit departments implement data analytics programs. He's also the host of the Audit podcast. Yes, such a thing exists. And a lot of speaking events to your name, kind of educating the masses on data analytics and internal audit. Welcome, Trent. It's a pleasure to have you, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Cool. So we kind of overlap in a weird way because we're in the security/IT world. You're in the data analytics and internal audit world, but internal audit and security have some overlap. Can you talk about what you do in way of data analytics in the internal audit world?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep the internal audit speak kind of quick and high level because I'm sure as soon as people heard internal audit, they went, "No, we're not listening to this. No, we're done." But really, what internal audit should be doing is effectively looking at a company's strategy, their strategic objectives, and then almost boiling it down to, okay, these are our objectives. What could go wrong to basically screw those up or help us not meet those? On the other side, we're also looking for opportunities to support those objectives also, but we'll just stick with the risk piece. That's usually what we're associated with. So we'll say, okay, these are the objectives. What are the risks to us not meeting these objectives? And then you almost take it down to the process level of, okay, if this thing goes wrong, this process doesn't operate like it's supposed to, consistently even, then it's going to blow everything up. And obviously, typically, there's not just one. It's an aggregate of multiple processes. But so that's what internal audit should be doing. And the way that we typically do that is we'll get down to that process, and then we'll take a sample of transactions, or let's just say like a reconciliation is like a very common process. We call them controls, but we'll call it a process. And so somebody does a reconciliation, okay, it ties out, everything looks good, it goes to a manager signs and dates it, maybe it goes to somebody else for review. So typically what we do is we would take like a sample of, we'll say 5, if it's it's done weekly, we'll take a sample of 5 of those reconciliations and we'll see that it was done correctly, that anything that needed to be followed up on was followed up, and that, the manager reviewed it sufficiently.
Yep.
So when we do with data though, do I know?
Yeah, I was going to say how this comes up in my world is so we interact with the board of directors. Obviously, we're in cybersecurity and they care about that, but they don't have a lot of insight into it. Mm-hmm. But the way I've always seen internal audit is that's kind of the gateway in terms of visibility for the board of directors. Is that kind of the same way you see it? Yeah,
that's a really good way to put it, and that's how it should be. Oftentimes, it may not, because within internal audit, we tend to get hung up on maybe low-hanging fruit or just kind of getting the audit out the door kind of thing to get it done. There's been significant push to get away from that in the past few years, and you're starting to see it a lot more. People kind of understand that a little bit more. Yeah. But relative to analytics, so instead of doing that sample of 5, we'll take like the full, all the data from both sides of the reconciliation and do one big reconciliation and then see what falls out. And then we can go from there and say, okay, did you guys do this like it was supposed to be done? If something falls out or something to that degree. So that's a common one that I'll use just because most people understand what a reconciliation is. But really it can be pretty much anything as long as there's data behind it. Internal audit can be the one to facilitate the analytics behind that, and then even just pass it on to management. Like we'll build tools for internal audit departments, and then they'll actually pass that on to management to use on their own.
Yeah, so a lot of our clients are what we call high growth tech companies. So they're like, unicorn type companies, but they have a board. And if you're sitting on this board, often what we hear is like they want a set of KPIs. So like, the owner or whoever's coming and saying things are going great, we're crushing it on all fronts, and the KPIs are all green on a slide deck. But even if they do have an internal audit, that's largely manual. So like it's like, they maybe took a sample or they, fiddled with the data to get the metrics they want. And a lot of what we hear that folks want in the security space and also the accounting and finance space is this idea of real-time monitoring. Mm-hmm. So I want like health checks all the time, so I have accurate, KPIs at the end of the day. What are some of the use cases that you're doing in terms of data analytics and integrating that to internal audit? Are there like a few that everyone can benefit from?
Yeah, I think one that especially the folks your audience might benefit from that I always see common with startups is, hey, I work at the startup, and because the controls are looser, I can set myself up as a vendor. Maybe shouldn't even say this because if you don't, somebody might go, well, shit, I didn't think about that. I can do that. Set yourself as a vendor and effectively just pay yourself with a company credit card. Hey, I'm OfficeDepot.com or something. And so when it runs through, you look at it and you go, okay, what's OfficeDepot.com? We're familiar with them.
Yep.
And then you can kind of get away with it. So one thing that we'll do relative to analytics is we can take the data and compare the all of your vendors and all of your employees across a couple different areas. So like the name would make sense, the address would make sense, the phone number, bank account information, and you can reconcile those. And then if something falls out, then it's usually a pretty dead giveaway.
If I'm the CEO and I set my wife up as the cleaning service and set up an auto pay via credit card to go to her, every month. And so you have mechanisms through analytics where you could like identify potentially there's some fraud happening in terms of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it gets a little stickier there. It's not as easy as does this address of the employee match the address of the vendor, but there's other ways to get there and find that one. But I think what a lot of people usually get excited about is the idea of finding fraud.
Yep.
And so that's largely we found with machine learning has been really helpful because you can predict where there is fraud. And so we'll build entire systems for going back to just like internal credit cards or company credit cards. So systems that will identify potential credit card fraud or purchasing card fraud within your company has been a good one. And then one interesting use case was a lot of times the like fraud hotlines are tied to the internal audit department. So somebody finds fraud, they'll call internal audit and kind of report it through that. And so there was that situation, and I think it's something like even if you get busted committing fraud and you admit to it and you like help the investigators and say, look, this one was fraud, this transaction was fraud, this one was fraud, you usually miss about a third or 2/3. So you only account for like a third. So 2/3 of the fraudulent activity is not accounted for. So what we did is we said, okay, look, we know which ones were fraud. We know which ones were not fraud. We can build a model around that to predict where the other ones that are fraud that we didn't know were fraud. And so that was pretty interesting. So we did that and then ran it and then said, hey, these are the ones we think, might also be fraud. So instead of looking at, there's thousands of transactions. So instead of taking a sample and looking at them, like a random sample, you can take this very specific sample of we believe these are fraud based on our model. And sent them, and then they came back to us the next day and said, it's funny that you mentioned that one specifically, that transaction. We had identified that one and the other investigator did for reasons that we forgot to tell you, basically. Like, we thought that one was fraud too, but we didn't, just forgot to tell you the details. And so it was kind of interesting to get, like, that validation from doing that, though.
How did you get into analytics? Is this something that you self-educated on or just...
Yeah, there definitely wasn't a program that I came from. I think it was when I was in external audit. So that's the, if Ernst & Young, PwC, KPMG, Deloitte, Grant Thornton, the big ones. When I was doing that work, we would, I guess somebody taught me this one control that we would test. So if somebody leaves the company, if they're terminated, if they retire, if they're fired, if they just leave on their own, they're not supposed to have access to the systems that they had access to. That should be removed. And so what we'd do was we would take a list of all the terminated users for a given period and then compare it to all of the current users in the applications. And then anything that fell out, we would say, okay, look, this person still has access to the GL. They were terminated 2 months ago. You need to take that out. And so that was my first kind of introduction into it because I said, look, we don't have to do this like manual process of taking a sample of terminated users and then going to see if they were taken out of the systems or not. Like we can just test all of this stuff all in one swing. And once we've done it once, we have it set up for next year to do the exact same thing. We just basically get the data, push a button, and it'll do it for us. So that was kind of the eye-opening moment for me, at least like as an auditor, and how we could use data to get better assurance, like better coverage, test everything instead of just a sample, and then also that we could automate a lot of the work that we were already doing. So that was my introduction and light bulb moment, and then I just kind of took it and ran with it after that.
What kind of tools are you using? Are you using like Power BI, Excel spreadsheets, something else, Tableau?
Yeah, there's always going to be Excel. there's certain functionality, like I love pivot tables. To me, Excel does pivot tables, that type of functionality better than anybody else. So I always will have Excel in my back pocket. The tool that I use primarily is called ACL. It stands for Audit Control Language. Kind of the OG of audit analytics software is ACL. So that's the one. Those are the, I guess, two that I primarily use. I use Tableau a little bit. Power BI is something that people are asking me. I mean, literally today, somebody was asking me about Power BI. So a lot of Power BI out there. R and Python are really popular. Not so much in my world, but definitely in the analytics world. So those are the main tools that I use, though.
Yep. So one thing I'm interested in is you found this niche, this data analytics niche, and kind of the meat of what we want to talk about today. What fascinates me is this gig economy. So you found a niche. Ultimately, you decided that you could make money off of this niche, and then you took it to the next step. And I don't consider it boring, but some people might consider internal audit boring, and you developed a whole social media plan around that in terms of you're very active on LinkedIn. You do a podcast that's popular in your niche. You're building a business off of this niche. Can you talk about that? Like, what was that journey like? How did you decide I can turn this into a career, and then social media is the way to get gigs off of that?
Yeah, I think we just saw the need or the demand. I mean, all of our literature from the publications, the internal audit or the audit publications, they've been talking about analytics for years.
Yeah.
And then every year, tons of companies do surveys. All the big four do surveys, and you look at it, and the surveys would always come back and go, "Yeah, we're trying to do it, but we can't," or "Yeah, it's on our plan for next year," or something like that.
Yep.
And so we just kind of sat there and said, "Well, we know how to do that. Why not just? Well, we could just do that for people." So that's kind of where it got started. We just felt like the demand was out there, and we knew how to do it. We knew how to do it really well, and so we kind of fill that gap. As far as social goes, I was pretty terrified to get on there. I think Facebook came out like 2 years before I went to school or like went to college, and that's when it was just college.
Yeah.
And like I'd put pictures up or whatever for a couple years, and then didn't like once Twitter came around, I was like, I'm done. Like it's too much already, And like Instagram hadn't really even come out yet, but we're basically required to have a LinkedIn profile, so I always had that and would log in occasionally and scroll through. And then eventually it was just like, all right, man, you got to, I think a big piece of being an entrepreneur is being uncomfortable. And so I got comfortable with that. And so just started posting more, made it a point for a while to post every day. Probably did that for 6-9 months before bringing it back a little bit. But I remember it wasn't even my first post. It was the first comment that I left on a post. And like I was sitting in the office and I saw it and I was like, okay, this is the one. I'm going to do it. I'm going to reply. I'm going to add a comment to this guy's post. And it's somebody who now, and he's been on my podcast since. He's like a top 10 internal audit thought leader. So kind of a big deal. In
It's
our
like Norman
profession.
Marks. That's the only top 10.
Well, so Norman is in my opinion, but Hal Guerin is right up there with him, and is fantastic. And so is Hal, and he's on LinkedIn all the time posting about stuff other than internal audit. But I told him this story when he came on, but I started write the comment, and then I was like, no, I don't like that. I'm going to change that. And then I'd go back in and I'd get caught up doing something else, and I come back. It took me 4 hours to just write a comment. It was like 3 sentences. And then I was finally, I had to leave the office, and I was just like, all right, I hit send, went home. As soon as I got home, like pulled it up on my phone, and Hal's reply was, okay, thanks, Trent. I'm not really sure I get what you're talking about, though. And I was just like, like I spent all that time, and he was just like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, man. So I think, but once I got over that hump, like it was a lot easier to just even to comment on people's stuff. Like you don't want to be judged for, what you're putting out there, but I at least pretty quickly got over that. And then, naturally from that, I would put something out, post something or whatever. But, and then from there, as far as the podcast goes, I was talking to a friend of mine, Blake Bozart, who is on, he's big on LinkedIn, and once Clubhouse hit, he was like, I'm going Clubhouse. So he's been hitting that really hard and doing really good work there. But he kind of got in my circle, and we had like that 30-minute intro call, and we talked, and then Got done, and like 2 minutes later, he called me back and he's like, dude, you got to start a podcast for internal audit. And I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about that for, a year or so, but never really did it. And he just kind of told me all the benefits of doing it, and said within a niche, like, it's perfect, you should do it. And so it was either that day or the next day. I wrote a post that just said, hey, I'm starting a podcast for internal auditors. And then like the next sentence was, now I just got to figure out how to start a podcast for internal auditors. So I made it like a point to like put it out there, to like almost hold myself accountable, so that, in 6 months goes by or whatever, people are like, dude, what about that podcast you're going to start? Where, did you ever do anything with that? So
they say there's an audience for every niche. And I think that's true, especially like the connected way the internet is. And internal audit is certainly a niche. How's your audience responded? Have you seen like positive results in terms of leads and opportunities and stuff like that from it?
Yeah, it's been great leads and opportunities wise. And then also, I remember after we published the first one, I was sitting beside my wife, like we basically work back to back almost in our home office. And a couple hours went by and I finally looked at the downloads. 11 people downloaded it, and I was like, holy shit, 11 people downloaded this. Can you believe 11 people are listening to what I'm saying? And it was just like blown away. And then just stuck with the consistency of putting out, an episode. Initially, it was every 2 weeks, because I didn't think I was going to be able to get enough guests to fill a weekly episode or a weekly show. And it caught on really quick. And so we're able to do one a week. And just like with anything, you post every day for 6 months, eventually you're going to get a following of some degree. And if we put out content, consistently, every Tuesday, it's dropping every Tuesday. And so that's, been part of it. And it's grown. Almost every episode has more downloads than the previous episode, usually by a decent margin. So it's doing really well. But as far as leads and opportunities, it's probably been the best thing that I've done. And I'm sure it comes down to relationships more than anything, especially B2B is all about relationships. And so having that, the way I do it is I usually do a 30 to 45 minute pre-call, especially with audit folks, because they are a bit over analytical, so they don't want to be like, being recorded without kind of knowing what's coming up. So I'll do that just to kind of like clear the heebie-jeebies with them, talk about topics, logistics, all that kind of stuff. But in a 30 to 45 minute call, we might spend 10 minutes talking about the podcast a lot of times. I see like the clock ticking down. I'm like, okay, this is a great conversation, but real quick about the podcast, you want to talk about these 3 things and these 2 other things, and then, okay, we'll set a date and here's how we'll do it, and then, okay, bye. It's like a 5-minute deal sometimes. So it's been great for building relationships, probably the best thing for building relationships. If you think about it, what would be, I'm sure most of the people listening have sent a cold email. What's better? Hey, here's my thing, buy it, or hey, do you want to come on my podcast to share your expertise with the world? And they go, you want?
We see the same thing. It's like it's easier if you're offering something rather than just only taking. How hard is it for you to get guests? Is it a simple email? Are you networking with folks? What are you doing to get guests?
So I did have like an outreach script or a sequence, of reaching out to people through email, and it really didn't work. I didn't give it a huge chance. There wasn't a ton of data around it in terms of like I didn't get enough volume to really measure it, but I don't think I got anything on that. And so I found social to be the absolute easiest way to do it. And for me, like in my profession, you have to get a lot of continuing education credits. So most people have to get at least 40. So training is a really big deal in my profession. So there's people that's all they do. They teach these courses. Used to be in-person kind of thing, and you would get 100 people in a room, take an 8-hour course, get your continuing education credits, and kind of be good. And so those are the people that I targeted to begin with, because I knew that they wouldn't be scared to speak on camera. I knew they had something to say. And so I, would look to those people, or I'd look at like our industry publications. So there's, we still have, magazines. I guess most have gone digital now, but, I'd go to them and look at the authors of those and go, hey, I love this article about, AI or whatever in the profession. Would you want to come on and talk about that? And so that's largely how I did it until it got to the point where there's enough traction with it now that I can, for the most part, I can just, reach out and say, hey, I'd love to have you on, would you be interested in coming on? And I think maybe 2 people have said no in the past couple months. So the momentum from the show kind of carries, itself in helping get good guests and things like that.
Yeah, you mentioned that you kind of started this as a side gig, and then it's kind of escalated from there. And we keep reading how we're kind of in the gig economy. A lot of solo entrepreneurs or people doing things as a side gig, that kind of thing. Especially if people are a little bit afraid just to drop everything and take the risk of starting a business. So I know we have kind of an entrepreneur audience that probably interested. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what was your process in like identifying side gig opportunities? What's the tech stack that you use to send invoices and sign agreements, that kind of thing? How did you get up to speed on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and so the analytics consulting and the podcasts are side gigs. So I work full time as a way to pay the bills more or less, and I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And the reason I'm completely fine with that and where I am with it, because it is a relationship business that I'm in. Like It's given me time to build relationships. I didn't have relationships with a lot of these people. In my former job, when I was external audit, I didn't understand the importance of relationships, so I didn't put any time into them really, Like, I was like, look, let's just bang this thing out and let's go home. Like, I don't want to necessarily go to lunch and like hang out afterwards. Like, let's just get the job done. I just want to go home. Which took a long time to kind of realize that was a horrible, horrible approach, regardless of if you plan on doing something on your own or not anyway. But so it's afforded me time to build the relationships that I needed to get business coming in. So it's been great in that respect, and being able to be able to do both. And then as far as tech stack, so my expenses and the revenues are usually large clients, so it's just one or two decent sized invoices. So I don't even use QuickBooks. I started to, and I sat down, like my accountant went over everything with me, and I was like, that's a little bit overkill. Like I don't need that. And we were talking about it. I was like, what do you think? Do you think I need it? And he's like, no, I don't think you need it the way you're doing it. And so like I have as far as accounting goes, I have a spreadsheet, and I call it Slow Books, where I track everything. Yeah. Because it's pretty routine, Like I know what's coming up and everything. So for now, there's not a need for that. But I use Outreach for outreach. So outreach.io is my CRM. And then, Gmail and all the good stuff there. I use Box for all of my hosting. It's kind of steep, I think, but it's what a lot of my clients use also. So it just kind of it makes sense and makes it easier to do that. So outside of analytics software that we already talked about, that's pretty much it for me.
What about website? Did you build your own? Did you contract somebody to do it?
No, yeah, I went the outsourced route. There's too many people that know how to build a website, and there's too many people that know how to make them look really good, which isn't the number one thing. It needs to be functional, but it certainly needs to look good also. So I 100% contracted that out and was completely happy about doing that.
How much do you think you've invested in like all of your infrastructure, like in a year? Is it $1,000 a year, or kind of including like you have a camera and stuff, I'm guessing, to get the podcast quality up?
I just submitted my taxes today. I should know that better. I mean, outreach alone is north of 1,000, so we'll say 5.
Yeah.
Which includes all the podcast, also all that kind of stuff. So yeah, maybe 4.
I mean, that's pretty crazy. I love this modern economy that we live in, because from the outside perspective looking in, you're as professional as any business, right? You got a nice website, got a whole podcast and marketing thing going on, LinkedIn, look good on camera, got professional mic, lights, I'm assuming. And but we can do that today in this kind of modern gig economy. You can build an individual brand where you have people coming to you to do work. You identified a niche that you can solve for customers and make a pretty good living on the side doing that kind of thing. I think a lot of people are very interested in that.
Yeah.
How did you learn how to do podcasting and stuff? Was that just YouTube, or?
Say that again?
How did you learn how to do podcasting, or where did you get the idea? Was it that conversation you mentioned, or was it just like seeing people on YouTube do it? Or
Blake's friend, Blake Bodzart, is the guy I was talking about, who said, you need to do the podcast. His friend runs Sweetfish Media. They're a podcast provider, production company. and they have probably the best lead magnet I've ever seen. Like, it's so good that you almost don't even need them. Like, if I was advising them, I would say dial that thing back a little bit, because seemingly you're giving it all away, but it's a 26 step, at least at the time, maybe they've beefed it up or cut it down, but 26 step by step how to start a podcast. It even included the copy for doing outreach for a couple times, and like how to even automate some of that stuff. So it was like their full process boiled down.
All right, so we got to plug those guys. What is it called? Leadfish? What is it?
No, the Sweetfish Media is the company.
Okay.
I think they've had over 1 billion downloads across all of their podcasts, and so their primary one, I think, is a B2B podcast. And then what they do is they support other marketers and helping them develop podcasts for themselves or for their company. So that's kind of they bring people on, they talk podcasting, and then if their guests are interested, then they will develop a podcast for them and do all the work. I think like in their workflow, they show, all the steps of what it takes to do a podcast. And then they just have like, you're the host, all you do is ask questions kind of thing. So they basically, you can outsource everything to them. So I took some of their model and did the same thing and found a really good person. Once I think my podcast launched, I know we were working on it before the pandemic, and that first episode might have come out like a week or two before that. And so there's a lot of people in the gig economy, especially looking for work. So I found a really good editor that was young, that I worked well with, who was super professional. Like, I'll send her stuff 4 hours before we need to get it published, and I'll send her a text. She's like, yeah, no problem, I'll get it done. And, give me an hour, I'll get it done, and she'll send it back. So definitely the gig economy has been fantastic for things like that and finding it. Because I'm not I have creative thoughts, I would say, and but that's about where it ends. Once I have to put like any creativity onto a website or some kind of marketing, whatever, kind of goes out the window. So it's been really good to be able to outsource like the creative piece of like the editing and the the backdrops and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Cool. Well, give me 1 sec. I'm going to plug something in.
Yeah.
There we go. I'll edit that. Cool. So you outsource the some of the production. So this is interesting. So basically, based on your work experience, you said, hey, data analytics is a niche and there's a need. I think almost anyone in professional services can identify some other need that's similar. You got a simple technology stack, a lot of it free, including the 26-step process to setting up a podcast. Outsource the website stuff, got a little bit of media. Where do you find like good contractors? Are you using something like Fiverr or something like that, or just a network?
Yeah, I've used Fiverr, Upwork. I don't know how. I think somebody recommended it to me years and years ago at like a CEO roundtable event, and they said there's all these things, and Upwork was just the first one. So that's what I picked up and ran with. And so I've tried some of the other ones, but I guess just because my familiarity with Upwork, that's the one that I use. But I use that for, pitch decks, with outsourcing stuff like that, a lot of times you pay for what you get, but if you look hard enough, or if you spend time and the money, like I've gone through a couple that were not good to find the good one, but now I've got, the good pitch deck person that I can just send it to. I just put the copy in there and I say, look, make it look really, really good, and send it back. So it's a bit of a process to find those people, but once you find, the handful that you need, it's a huge advantage, and takes takes the stress off and takes the weight off the shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it basically turns any individual into a small company, because you can outsource, like you said, pitch deck creation, website stuff, technology, pretty much the full gamut outside of the thing that you sell that is your niche, which is very interesting. How big do you think your podcast audience is? Do you have any sense?
We get about probably 600 downloads a week right now.
That's a lot if you consider how long you've been doing it and the niche. Like that's 600. You don't download an audit podcast unless you know what that is and you're very interested in it.
Yeah.
So that's like 600 qualified leads that you can pretty much guarantee care about it.
Yeah.
Do you get like straight inbound, like people will say, hey, I heard you on the podcast and I need some data analytics help. Does that happen very often, or is it kind of through
No, that doesn't. I guess the best play there is somebody reaches out and says, hey, I heard the podcast, I loved it, and it's Wow, that's great. Thank you so much. Let's have a conversation kind of thing, and kind of taking it from there. But no, I haven't had that. But on the Green Skies website, there's a link, like as soon as you go to it, that says like, let's chat or let's build or something like that. You click it, it takes you to my calendar, you put time in there. And so on the intro of the podcast, it's, just a quick shout out to Green Skies, and hey, we do, analytics for internal audit department. If you need help with that, check us out. So we'll get some from that, but I haven't had anybody reach out and say, I need help with analytics I heard the podcast. And that might even be, at least directly to me, because I don't really make it about like me and what I do hardly ever. Most of the editing that we do is editing me out. So like a lot of times it's just me and the guests having a conversation. I'll ask a question, they give their thoughts, and then I might add mine. Really just to like keep the conversation going. And then when we go back to edit, like that, most of the time I just cut out whatever it is that I was saying. So I would say out of the, I don't know, we probably have 45 at least recorded up to this point. I mean, not even a third. We'll say a quarter of them. I even mentioned the fact that I do analytics. I make it much, much, much more about the audience and the guest. Primarily the guest, and then second to that, I say, look, there is an audience. Like you have to speak to the audience also, in terms of like giving value and giving something, an actionable takeaway is a big thing for me. Like you can't just come on and talk theory the whole time. I mean, it's great and everything, but you have to be able to say, okay, this is how you can do that. At least a first step or something. So. Maybe that's why I make mine significantly more about the guest and the audience than I do myself, though.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like all the gurus say to do that, and I think they're right, because it's kind of one of our philosophies at Risk 360 is to outteach the competition.
Nice.
So when we write blogs or do this podcast or whatever else we do, our mental intent is just to teach. It's not about to sell anything or anything like that, but I think just all those little exposures to the brand add maybe credibility, or maybe if you ever do need analytics, you're like, well, I need to reach out to Green Skies. I think I heard a guy on a podcast one time.
Yeah.
And it's years later. What else? How do you attribute like getting direct leads as a in the gig economy? Is there any activities that you can say is like, this is how I get work, or is it kind of accumulation of all this different stuff?
And it's largely an accumulation. It's all, like I said, it's relationships. So even if somebody comes on the show and they say, we have 4 full-time data analytics people, we don't need any help with that. And that's great. I'm glad that you have that. And what I'll ask them though is, because of the way like our industry or our profession's shaped up, all of the internet is dominated by these basically 4 huge firms. So if you type in audit analytics, I mean, it's like the first 4 pages is just them. And so like a lot of companies don't want to pay the huge rate for those firms. And I mean, the rates are deservingly so. I mean, they are what they are for a reason. And so I'll say, look, I'm not going to ask you to straight up just refer me to somebody if you hear that they need analytics, because I've never worked with you and I wouldn't ask you to do that. Like put your name out there for me. But what I would ask is that if you hear somebody that needs analytics, you say, hey, I know somebody that does it. This is him. You should have a conversation with him, in that sense of a referral, as opposed to I'm going to refer you to them. You should definitely work with them kind of thing. Just again, because I haven't done work with them, I don't think it's appropriate to ask, for a referral in that sense. But I say, it's a referral in the sense of, instead of them Googling for hours to try to find somebody that they're not going to find, just send them to me, if you hear of something. So,
are there a few problems that you solve? Like, have you tried to productize this, or is it largely kind of consulting basis, and you kind of solve whatever problem they have?
Yeah, there was a bit of a big problem. So we finally landed the big client, and super excited about that. And then realized we spent so much time on execution of that client that we didn't have time for additional outreach, really, at least not the scale that we needed to. And so it did not take very long to realize that we needed to productize it a bit more. So that's been a large effort over the past 6 months or so. And really what we're doing is we're finding niche areas across various industries that have a ton of data and don't have anything to do with it, because it is such a niche area that there's not a ton of competition there. So we're building analytics tools specifically for them as a product to lower the amount of custom work we're doing so we can focus more on outreach.
Is the folks that you typically serve the internal audit department, or is it like finance or accounting that's looking for data analytics solutions?
Yeah, it's the intent has always been internal audit. I mean, those are my people. Those are who I know. And then, as I'm sure you and your listeners probably know, whoever you think is maybe your initial buyer for what you built, you start doing some research and some outreach. And, even the people I reach out to, they straight up told me, they're like, that's cool, and we could use that, but talk to this other department because they would use that, like all the time. So, yeah, we've found that it doesn't necessarily just play with internal audit. And it's kind of like I was telling you earlier, like we build tools on a custom gig. We'll build a tool for internal audit, and then over time they'll hand it over to management. And that kind of gets into management taking ownership of that responsibility and the kind of the lines of objectivity and independence that internal audit has to play along with. But so we definitely find though that we'll reach out to internal audit and they'll go, that's cool. You should go talk to the actual department though, because they would probably benefit from it more.
Awesome. Well, Trent, I'm out of questions, man. You have a cool journey. I think this whole gig economy thing's cool. You should write an ebook on like how to start a gig. That'd be pretty cool. I'd read it.
I don't think so.
So I guess where people can find you, I know you got Greenskies Analytics on the web. They can Google it. They can look at the website. Trent on LinkedIn, and then also the Audit podcast that they can find you. Anywhere else people can find you if they want to?
That's it. I'm mostly hanging out on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message or connect, or we can talk about analytics stuff or really whatever you want to. My journey in more depth, if that resonated with anybody, or if you know what, actually I'd appreciate is if everybody is listening has a similar journey and was like, but I did this thing different and it paid off big. Like if you would reach out to me and so like I could learn from you, that would be fantastic actually.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Trent. If you guys enjoyed this, check out Tuesday Morning Grind podcast on any of the podcast apps. You can also check us out on Risk 360 on YouTube. And we have a Tuesday Morning Grind podcast playlist. Thanks again, Trent. It's good talking to you.
Appreciate it. Good to be here.